Hello, welcome to Practicing Life podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Pitzer. Today I have Susan Vickers with us, and I'm very excited to introduce you to her. She is on her second book, which we will get to all of that. But let me introduce you to Susan. She is a broadcaster, author, model, entrepreneur, and community champion, supporting many local festivals, charities, and events. Susan broadcasts daily on international radio to over 985,000 people. She uses her platform to talk about and raise many issues among us that we all struggle with through our daily life. So works so perfectly with what we are here today doing with Practicing Life podcast, taking all of those things we're struggling with it, finding that silver lining, the light, having gratitude for whatever we face and getting stronger for it. So carrying on, following on from the immense success of her debut autobiography, I'm Not a Paca, which portrays the struggle of growing up with dual heritage in a predominantly racist part of the United Kingdom. Susan has written this follow-up book, which talks about how life feels as an adoptee and the struggles and lifelong judgments adoptees face daily. Susan has now formed the Susan Vickers Foundation to support other adoptees alongside adopters, foster parents, and agencies. In view of aiding people to make informed decisions when making such life-changing choices, Susan is now with us to discuss this. Susan uses her experience to help others by speaking out, highlighting social injustices, and supporting various truths and causes. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ashley. It's so nice to meet you.
That's nice to meet you. So I am so excited to dive into this because I got to read your prologue that you sent me. And as you mentioned in the prologue, you had talked about how most people don't talk about it from the adoptee standpoint. So let's hear your story. Like, what led you here to this day, writing this book and sharing what it was like to be the adoptee?
Okay, I'll try and summarize it as much as I can. I was born in the UK to dual heritage parents. My mother was white, blonde hair, blue eyes, English. My father was Asian, full Asian, dark hair and so on, very religious. Him and my mother came together. It was like a love story. They fell in love, run off, got married, didn't tell anyone, got pregnant with me. And his family, my biological father's family, was like, no, we can't have that. You have to marry one of your own, as they call it, somebody of your own race, own religion. We can't accept a foreign body into the family. And he was like, but I love Pamela, who was my mother. We're married, we've got to get used to it. The family didn't want to know. My mother's family were happy, they were fine. Pamela's my biological mother. She'd already got a son, white. And then one day, my biological father told my mother, I'm just taking Susan to see my family. And he took me up social services and left me there, basically.
Oh, goodness.
Um, Cut a long story short, I ended up being put into foster care and adopted by the people who fostered me, who were also a white family. They had also a daughter of their own, so white father, white mother, white daughter, and then they had me. Well, this was 1970, and back then, straight after the swinging 60s, there was a lot of mixed race, dual heritage children in the care system. And nobody would even foster them or look after them. But my mother was like, I don't care what colour their skin. I love babies. I'll look after them. And she was looking after so many dual heritage, multi-heritage children. And then she found out I was up for adoption. They asked if they could adopt me. They went through all the tests and so on and the checks, and they adopted me. Now, at that time, like I say, it's 1971 now. We were living on an estate where I was the only person that looked like this. I was the only person that had brown skin. everybody else at school had white skin. There was one Jamaican family, and that was it. There was nobody like this. And that in itself had a lot of problems. We had graffiti outside the house. We had, I was being in fights. It's people. I've been beaten up and bullied at school by adults and children. My sister was being beaten up at school because she was my sister. There were members of the family that wouldn't talk to the family anymore because I was now a legal part of their family and they didn't like it. There was a lot of problems. And I don't blame my parents for the most part because they didn't have any training or advice on how to deal with having a child of dual heritage in the family. That, you know, they didn't have anybody to say you could encounter this, you could encounter name calling or bullying or all these kind of things. And because of that, I'm not sure if you remember, but in the UK back in the 70s, the National Front, it was called, it was a huge racist group, like white supremacist group, that was causing riots all over the country, huge riots. It was on the news every night and so on. And I was seeing this on the news, and basically I was learning that if you had my colour skin, everybody hated you. You was a target. Nobody wanted you. You were dirty. You were uneducated. You was all of these things. That's how you were made to feel. So I had to keep saying to people, "No, I'm not. I'm white. I'm white." They're like, "You're not white. We can see you're not white." But I didn't know how to deal with it. And so it got to the stage where I was so much in denial or trying to prove that I didn't have mixed heritage. And to date, I've never had a curry in my life. I don't eat spicy food. I don't wear flowery dresses or do my hair or makeup in a certain way. I tried to make myself not look foreign at all, like I had any mixed blood in me. I tried to make myself look as white to be accepted. And that's how I lived my life up through school into adulthood. I denied being who I was. I had to pretend I was white to be involved in a conversation, to be accepted in a workplace, to have friends and so on. And I lived my life. I'm 53 years old now, and until I wrote my first book, which was a year ago, it was almost like a coming out for me. I had to, because I've got no children, I'm not married or anything like that, so I've got no legacy. So I thought I need to leave something behind to explain who I am and why I have certain mindsets and why I do certain things. So I wrote the first book, which is all about that. And I had to take friends that I'd been friends with for 30 years for a coffee to kind of say, to come out to them and say, you know, when we first met and I told you I was Italian or Spanish or whatever it may be, well, actually, I'm not. My father is Indian. And it took a long time. I'd be crying and I was shaking because it was like somebody coming out to their parents, to all the people that had known me for my life. And touch wood, not one of them cared, you know. But I wasn't strong enough back in the day to tell them the truth. So I was lucky, is that the right word to say? I was lucky that a lot of my friends didn't care. So I wrote the first book. And then as I started I toured the book and many people were coming and talking to me about it. And I was starting to find out a lot of people were adopted, but they never told anybody. And I was like, but why? Because they felt it was shameful. And you do have people looking at you in a certain way. If you tell somebody that you're adopted, they kind of go, "Oh, like you're a poor puppy that got rescued or something." And people, and I might be wrong, Ashley, but people ask you what you do for a job and where you come from, so they know how much respect to give you. And I've had my own businesses, and you know, I've got a platform, public platform, and so on. As soon as people know that I'm adopted, I see their face physically change sometimes, almost like, "Oh, we thought you were this person. Well, now you've kind of come down a level because nobody wanted you." And people have said that to me. They've said, well, what was wrong with you? What do you mean, what was wrong with me? Well, why didn't your mum and dad want you? Like there was something wrong with you? And I'm like, well, nothing. And this was people's perspective of what somebody adopted was. I thought, well, this can't be right. And because you do feel as an adoptee, well, why wasn't I good enough for you to keep me? Why did you just give me away? How could you give birth to a child, just give them away, like an old jacket or something? And it does make you have some sorts of insecurities and self-esteem concerns and self-worth, and such a question a lot. So I searched out my biological family for answers. Because aside from all the racism and concerns that my family and myself was getting, on top of that, I felt like I wasn't good enough. I was just giving away. So I searched out my biological parents. I met my biological mother, who had then had 4 of the children who she kept. So that made things even worse. Well, I was either the one that you gave away and you kept everybody else. And I think she was very pleased to have her long lost daughter back. And then I met my biological father, and he didn't want to know. He couldn't understand why I wanted to find him. And I said, I was your firstborn, I was your first ever child. Have you never thought, oh, I wonder what she's up to? Because we've all seen the TV programs, haven't we, where long lost families, where they get reunited with children that they've lost or given away or whatever, and it's all happy ever after. Well, it's not always happy ever after for people. And I said to Tony, my biological father, have you never thought about me? And he said, no. Just like that, like it was nothing. Like I'd asked him if he wanted a sweet. But no, what do you want? And I'm like, what do you mean? I think about my first boyfriend sometimes. So for you not to think about your first child, and he could not understand why I wanted to, because he was now happily married to a new wife. He'd got 5 children of his own, all sons. He was very high in the community, is very well respected businessman and so on. I was just the dirty secret, the previous life that he drew a curtain on.
Yeah, that he wanted to keep hidden, essentially.
Yes, because it would have ruined his image as it is now. He had this very clean cut, respected businessman image, big house, big car, all of that. So for me to come up and go, well, actually, he's been married before, and he was a very religious person. So I was the skeleton in the closet, shall we say. So left it at that, and I tried to forge a relationship with my biological mother. That didn't work out very well, so I don't want to give any spoilers for the book. So that was left aside.
That's in book 1, right?
That's me meeting my biological mother is in book 1. Book 2, which is the one that's due out next month in September, that is talking about the relationship I had with her and why it didn't work out. So I won't give you any spoilers there, because everything was great at one point, and then things took a turn, a very bad turn. And then because you never really get answers. There's no actual proof with a lot of things. When people find their biological families, you only know what they tell you, in most cases. So I don't think I ever got to the truth as to why I was adopted or whose idea, because they both blamed each other. My father said it was my mother, and mother said it was him, and you never get to the truth. So you're left in this limbo. And then growing up with an adopted family, sometimes if there were arguments, my parents or my sister would say, well, you're not really family anyway. And I'm like, hold on, but you adopted me I was 18 months old when you adopted me. So, and that hurts, and you will always never really be family. And I've always said, and again, I might be wrong, I can only talk about what research and experiences. If you've got children, Ashley, and a lot of people have, well, if you had a child that you adopted, or that was your partner's own child but not yours as such, and you had a blended family, as they're called now. So if you had a child that was yours and a child that was adopted, or a stepchild, and that house was on fire, who are you going to rescue first? And it's easy to think consciously now, but unconsciously, I imagine 9 times out of 10, you'd rescue your biological child. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you have a different bond with your biological child, because you formed a bond as they were growing inside. As soon as they were conceived, you start forming a bond. So you don't have that same bond with somebody who you didn't carry, or somebody you met when they were 9 years old already. So the bond is different. And I know some parents say, oh, we love all our children equally. Do you though? A lot of people have favourites, and a lot of people, there's a family in the States, and I can't remember off the top of my head exactly where now, but they were married, they adopted 5 children, and they won the lottery. I don't know if you know this story. They won the lottery. They handed all 5 children back. You wouldn't have been able to do that if there was their own child, unless they put them in care. So it just shows, the bond isn't there. Some people adopt, because they want to make their family bigger, or they've got a big house, or they want to help, or they want to make themselves feel better, or they want it to blend the marriage. And people talk about adoption from an adopteur's point of view in a very selfish way. Oh, we couldn't have any more children, so we adopted. Oh, there was refugees, so we adopted them. Aren't we good? Nobody ever talks about what it's like to be an adoptee, because you're made to feel forever grateful. You're made to feel you're obliged to love us because we rescued you. You're made to feel this eternal gratefulness, and we are grateful. My mother said to me, I looked after you, I chose you, I rescued you as a child. You have to look after me now. It's like it's an obligation, like it's some unwritten contract. So
that you didn't agree to or sign. Like it's like you had a voice in the matter.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not saying I didn't want to look after my mom until her dying day. I didn't want, I loved her, I did. But you have to work out, is it obligation or is it love? Because she had her own daughter, and she didn't she didn't do anything for her. I was the one that did, but I felt I had to. I felt I didn't really have a choice, because she did rescue me. If my mum hadn't have adopted me, I don't know what kind of life I would have had. I could have had a fabulous life, or I could have ended up living on the streets or something. I don't know. We will never know. So I did feel grateful, but I shouldn't feel like that, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, as part of what I do with coaching is moving people away from the shoulds, because the shoulds to me is like prison. And we often joke that it means it's shitting on yourself, like and so I am not a fan of any time when you feel like you have to do something because it should happen. But I will tell you, your adopted mother essentially formed your expectations and your boundaries probably from a really young age. And because of that, like, even if you wanted to, you would eventually you would have been fighting your own internal system at that point, because you have already from your childhood or probably your younger days this programming that she has been around you talking to you about, creating that expectation. And so that's programmed like a highway in your brain, and you would have been fighting yourself to go onto a different highway. It's not that you couldn't have, it's just like you would have had to deal with the discomfort and pain of choosing a different path, because this one had already been laid out for you.
Yeah. And the thing is, the cover of I think I sent you the cover of this book now, because this book is all about how it feels to be an adoptee from an adoptee's point of view, to give potential adopters and foster parents perspective as to how we feel about being adopted and fostered. And I ended up in therapy because my mum, towards the latter years, was so awful. She put me through the ringer, and I ended up in therapy. And my therapist said to me, you don't have to look after, you can walk away from your mum. because she's toxic, she's all of these things. And I was like, no, I can't. If she walked away from me, where would I be? She did rescue me, and I had this huge feeling of guilt, or that I was even feeling that way. And I couldn't walk away. I had to put up with the abuse and the trauma and everything that she was giving me. And so I,
Yeah, take a moment.
and it was hard, Ashley. It was really hard. But I felt obligated, and that's the only word that I can use, because I was adopted. Um,
So
and she
actually, I'm going to take a moment. Maybe you won't like me for this. I don't know. But circling back to how you started kind of your story, you talked about oftentimes that people are adopting out of like selfish wants and desires and needs. And what's
sometimes.
really interesting is like so I'm tying in this pattern here. Like it was a cycle that got completed. This is what I am seeing, and you can correct me. But in your case, I can't speak from all adoptees and adopters, but your parents adopted you not necessarily out of like just pure unconditional love, because they got something out of it from it. Like it provided them something, right? And it's like now on the flip end, when she is going to need to be rescued, she already has that expectation on you, but it wasn't done out of love. And it couldn't have been done out of love because how she was treating you.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
really weird cycle, because in both ends, whenever possible, I encourage people to do things from their heart and out of love, meaning you don't expect anything back in return. You don't need anything in return. Like doing the act itself is the love, and that is the reward. And so
It's unconditional, isn't it? As
yeah,
a parent, it's unconditional.
yeah, yeah. And so it's sad, because like had you gotten to maybe fulfill this pattern that was established for you, but doing it from a place of love, it would have been a healing process for you instead of what it is now or was.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And on the positive side, adoption, I'm not sure about the States, but in the UK, adoption is a lot different from what it was. You have lifelong care now, so you always have, like, if we'd have been going through everything that we went through today, we'd have had support, and my parents would have had support. So when I was coming home, because I was being racially abused, and some of the family was being racially abused, my parents would have been able to turn to social services for help and support with that. They didn't have any of that, so a lot of the things I I don't blame them for with how they reacted to it. But a lot of things, like you say, if things were done from the soul, I talk a lot about the soul, from the soul or from love, it would have been different. But and and I'm not sure I agree with this, because I don't know enough about it. But you can hand back adopted children now, like that family in the States. If
yeah,
my mom and dad had have known that, then I think they would have handed me back, because they wasn't expecting all the abuse that came from having somebody with this colour skin. But what would the answer have been? And I speak to the adoption services and the fostering services a lot. And I've asked them all this question. Nobody's been able to come back to me with a definitive answer. So if you've got somebody like me who is dual heritage, I'm half and half. I don't like using that as an analogy because I'm a full person, but I'm half Asian and half English. Do you send me to an Asian family, or do you send me to a white family? Because either way, I'm going to miss out on the other half, if you know. And they always say to me, we always debate this, we don't know, we still haven't got an answer.
mhm.
So I'm not sure what the answer is, but there needs to be a lot more support. And I think there is now. But to be able to hand children back, like you've bought a pair of shoes that you've only just realised don't really fit and you don't really like them, or we'll take them back to the shop. You, you can't hand your children back, Ashley.
Actually, that's not the case. I mean, So like for instance, I have two special needs kids and one of them is extremely delayed. And so we have a case manager who comes out every month. It is something that the government does to make sure that my child is in a safe environment, making sure that, we are having a good relationship, my child is well cared for. But in this process, I mean, I've gotten to be friends with my case manager, so we talk like kind of liberally. And she tells me all the time that there are many people out there who have special needs kids that they just can't handle it, whether it's emotionally, mentally, or financially, and they turn them over to the state. And I
Or they
will
put them
tell
into the
you,
system. Yeah.
yeah, and apparently, like that's one of the things that I don't think that they praise me, but they do acknowledge the fact that it is very rare for someone like my kid with their issues that, like, one, my husband and I are still together, and two, that I keep my kid and I don't turn them over. But I will say at one point with my kid, who was going through some just mental issues, I got to the point where I didn't feel like it was safe for my child to be at home anymore, not only for our environment, but for the environment he was creating at my house. Like for instance, and he doesn't remember the stuff, he blacked out completely, but he made an attack on me. And so I'm like, if he were to attack my other child, like I just can't do this. And so I looked at signing my kid over to the state. So I mean, it does happen. Even in I love my kids. I mean, they are the world to me. And I'm so grateful that things worked out the way that they did. And we were able to get my kid help. And he's a mentally, in a different place and sound. But I can understand what other people are going through. And there are times in my life, I'm just going to be honest with you, vulnerable as ever, but there are times when I don't want to deal with some of the stuff that I've had to deal with my kids. And I feel like calling it quits. And I feel like this is too much.
Yeah.
And, those are some really dark moments for me. Somehow I've managed to pull through. And but I can only understand and have compassion for other people that are out there and are at their wits' end. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm always talking about love. Like, and I'm always talking about gratitude, because you can change your mindset and you can change your energy. And when you do that, you can change your strength within you.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you're talking about children that have got specific needs, if they're on the spectrum and so on, which is something they can't help. And it's still new to a lot of
yeah.
people how to deal with that. But I didn't have that problem. My mum and dad would have handed me back because they couldn't cope with having a child with this colour skin. And I can't help that. Nothing was going to change that. And they had no support. Um, but from being an adoptee and being made to feel you're not part of the family, you don't belong here, it affects the rest of it affects relationships with
Mhm.
friends and partners and employers and situations that you find, because you always carry that insecurity. Well, my partner growing up as, I love you, this is our, do you love me? I always have to test, do you really, or are you just saying that because you have to say put a house together, or
Oh
whatever?
yeah, your childhood traumas come out in your relationships for certain.
And I've never, and I don't think I ever will, um, feel I belong anywhere, because I don't know what that feels like, Ashley. I'm making a presumption here, but that invisible bond, I call it, that you have with your parents, because you might have your ups and downs and your arguments, you might have disliked her at times, but she's still my mum. Well, we can't change that. So we've still got that bond. I don't know what that feels like, because my mum wasn't my mum. She, in fact, I don't even remember her telling me she loved me. We never had hugs. There was no
Yeah.
tactile as kids. So
That's how I grew up, though, honestly. I mean, I grew up with a father who told us daily that he didn't want us. He didn't want to have anything to do with us, though he lived in the same house with us. So every day he was reminding me that your mother wanted children. I didn't want children. And so always talking to you about that. And I mean, I grew up in a very abusive home. So I can just remember if we were laughing in the car, that upset him and he would pull over and beat us. It was like we had to be quiet as a mouse and basically be non-existent in order for us to be safe in our home. And so, I mean, when I grew up, I had a lot of hate towards my mom, to tell you the truth, and a lot of respect for my father, who was very abusive to me. But I
But
just
did you love
remember,
him?
as I loved him because that's what a child is expected to do. You know what I mean? As an adult, and as I started to become more independent, because honestly, I had selective mutism, so the child abuse was so severe that I was scared to talk. And so for me growing up, I mean, I really didn't advocate for myself until I was much older. And so when I got to a point like you did, where you get strong enough, I was like, we don't have a relationship. I don't talk to my dad. There's no birthday cards. There's no nothing. I can love him from a distance. Thank
Yeah.
you. Goodbye. I wish him well. I wish everyone well. So anyway, that's how I grew up. But as a child, I was very angry with my mother. I was very angry with her. And so our bond really didn't develop until I was an adult. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time letting my mom know that she was like the worst mother ever. Like, sorry, mom, I love you now.
How would you feel if you found out that your dad was like that towards you because he wasn't really your dad?
I
You know,
mean,
if you found out that if you found some adoption papers, say, when you were looking for passports or something.
I don't know. I would imagine that I'd be like, well, that explains a lot, like, I'm, I don't, I guess I've done so much inner child work that I don't really, I've separated myself emotionally and mentally from my parents. Like, and so that's actually one of the things that allows me to have a really great relationship with my mother and allow me to see her for who she is and what she did and why she did it. So this is just me. And so I want this to be, applicable to like the audience and everything like that. But, so many of us have so many childhood struggles.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, my brother, he was kind of on the spectrum and special needs. And it was just that he wasn't even accepted within our own family because he caused us so much trouble. Like, he was always in trouble with the law. He was always bringing trouble onto our house. And it's like, even with our own house, I feel like we kind of shunned him. And like, if I think about like my husband, he was known as the black sheep of the family. He was the only boy. And he was a boy who was really rebellious and liked to break rules, and he never fit in. And so, like, just so much scolding, right? And so, like, as an adult, he still has that, like, well, I'm all by myself, which is one of the reasons why that you can look at us and see why we were attracted to each other. We've been together since we were 16, right? We were two people who felt like we didn't belong in our family and didn't know how to like really cope with our own emotions. So, and this isn't to take away from what you experienced by any means, because what you're saying is completely, like, it's eye-opening. It's something to be brought to light, because we're all going through different types of struggles. And
Yeah.
and our struggles can look different, but still have some underlining similarities. I know when I was growing up, one of my neighbors was a foster family. And so I, as somebody who didn't have very many friends because I didn't talk, like, I often would befriend these foster kids that would come in. And so they were just part of my daily life. They would stay for so many months, maybe even a year, but many of them were very angry. They were very angry at the system and how they were treated. And I would just get to know these and just hear their stories and see how many families that they were transferred to. And for me, they were very easy to become friends with because I understood their pain and I understood their hurt because I was
Yeah.
right there in my own
Yeah.
family with my biological family, like.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Somebody said to me, which is part of the crux of me writing this book. Somebody said to me last year, well, if you do invite somebody who's been in the system into your house, you kind of expect them to burn your house down. And I was like, pardon, I've never wanted to slap somebody so much in all my life. I'm like, do you realise that some of these foster children may have been passed through 10 different other homes? They may have been abused, they may have been experienced all kinds of, how would you feel if
Yeah.
you've been from pillar to post and abused and beaten and all sexually abused sometimes? Of course you're going to have, they're not going to all burn your house down, but you've got to expect that they will have trauma, and that trauma they can carry on for the rest of their lives, you know, if they're not well supported. So I
Yeah.
thought I've got to give a voice to, because how other people see you as an adoptee or foster person is not necessarily how you are. I'm capable of loving. I'm capable of holding a stable relationship and having people in my life and running businesses and being a good work and all those kind of things. I'm not this little baby that nobody wanted or that you rescued, that, you know, you've got to wrap in cotton wool, and or the opposite side of it, you're going to come and beat me or something like that. So I had to do this book to give a perspective from an adoptee's point of view,
Yeah.
the way people's faces changes, that the way people imagine somebody who's adopted or foster, like you've just said, you live next door to, you know, so many foster children.
Mhm.
And you got on well with them, you realise that there were people, you know, and some of them were angry, but there's reasons for that. Nobody's born angry, you know, you're a product of your environment, like we spoke about
Oh,
before.
yes.
And people don't see that. I was giving a talk at a foster event a month ago, and somebody came up to the table, and I was sitting next to somebody who was a foster parent, and they knew this person, and she says, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And this lady says, "Oh, well, I foster." And she says, "Do you? I didn't know that." And she went, "Oh." And she was like, I'm like, is that the reaction that you get? Like your Mother Teresa, like you're doing something wonderful. You know, it's very odd. People's perspectives are very odd. And yet there's so many people that have been through the system. There's so many people that I've met that have been adopted, and they won't tell anybody because they don't want people to have an impression or a perspective on what kind of person they think they are. There's a lot of people that have got no interest in finding their biological parents. There's, you know, there's a whole different spectrum of people with different experiences. And don't get me wrong, some people have wonderful experiences. My biological sister was adopted out to another family, and she went to a family that couldn't have children at all, and they adopted her, and they adopted two boys from another family. And she had no interest. When I found her, tracked her down, and she had no interest in finding our biological parents because she had everything. She was surrounded with love. She lived in this big posh house in a posh area. They had a lot of money. She had beautiful clothes. She was just loved so much. Um, and she had a completely different upbringing to me, even though we had the same biological parents. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think a lot needs to be done with adoptees and adopter parents, as well as the adoptees, and there needs to be a better perspective and
Yeah. I
train
mean,
everyone.
it's hurtful to even hear the words. I'm not in this situation. I'm just a bystander here, but it's hurtful to hear like, oh, I rescued you. Like,
Yeah.
oh, did you really, or did you like
Exactly. It's the same as Ashley, as those people that you see, which drives me up the wall. Because I help out in the soup kitchen and things like that, but I don't tell people about it. But when you get these people that are, and they're all over social media, they're giving money to a homeless person on the street, but they've got their phone taking a picture of them doing it. You're not doing
oh,
that because you're doing something good. You're doing that to make yourself feel better, for your ego. You know, if you're having to film yourself doing something good, then you're not doing it for the right reasons. And you know, it's like that. People have to, they have to live by their soul and by their hearts, like you say, with love. Things
yeah.
are pretty.
I mean, I did want to adopt at one point. I really did. My husband was definitely against it, and we didn't go that direction. But honestly, some of the reasons I wanted to do it was because of the fact that I grew up next to that foster family. And I just, childhood memories. I just remember those kids. And I don't know, like, I guess maybe a vain thing, but I'm like, I have so much love to give, like,
Yeah,
but
which is great, but that's what a lot of people do think. But it's more than love. And the subtitle in my book is
yeah,
love is not enough. You know, you have to have understanding, you have to have empathy, you have to have all of these other things. It's a lot of people think, I'll have them, I've got lots of love to give, I'll love you, but it has to be more than love. You have to have an understanding, a lifelong understanding, the words, the language that you use, and the things that you do. Like my mum used to introduce us to people. Oh, this is my daughter Carol, and this is my adopted daughter Susan. But she didn't have any idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's immediately making me in some kind of picture. My mum didn't say it to be malicious or horrible. She was either saying it to make herself look good. Oh, I've done something good. Look, I've rescued somebody. Or she saw me different. So this is my daughter, Carol, because it was a biological daughter, and this is my adopted daughter. Or she may have been doing it because I've got brown skin, and people, because I think people used to look at my mum and dad and my sister, then look at me and think my mum had had an affair with a foreign man or something. So but little things like that stay with you. Well, why wasn't I? I'm legally your daughter, so why didn't you introduce me? And then when I met my biological mother, she'd introduced me as this is my daughter, and people would go, didn't know you had a daughter, and that bothered me as well because I didn't feel like her daughter because she gave me away and didn't bring me up. So it's a lot more than just thinking, oh, I've got all this love to give, and I've got a spare room. You can stay there. And it's a lot more. It's
I think
a
I
lot more.
understand probably better than most, only because it's not all sunshine and rainbows having a special needs kid. It does take more than love to stick through some of the stuff that I've gone through with my kids.
I imagine resilience, strength, understanding. It's a whole load of it. Not just with adoptees, with people who've got children who's on the spectrum, or any kind, if they've got Down syndrome or anything, you know, they're paralysed, or it's, you know, absolutely, it's more than love. And
But
you've got to remember yourself too.
I also say that even with marriage, I think that I realize this. And I'm not a relationship therapist. And when I work with people on coaching, I work with them on themselves and not necessarily on the relationship. Though when you work on yourself, it automatically affects relationships. But like even if I look back like 10 years ago when things started being really, really difficult between my husband and I mean, I was brought up to think, oh, love is enough. You just love each other. Love is a choice. It is a choice. It totally is. I won't argue that. But I mean, I really realized early on that love isn't enough. I can love my husband, I can love my father, but that does not mean that we need to like coexist together. You know, like
Yeah.
it does not mean that I'm willing to tolerate these type of things. Like, so
That's when people say, I love you, but I don't like you. You know, it's
yeah.
completely different emotion and so on. And also people say, how can you love anybody else if you don't love yourself?
Oh, they
Well,
do
I've
say
never,
that.
yeah, and I've never loved myself. I'm not sure I ever will, but I don't feel it stops me from. I'm capable of loving somebody else. I'm absolutely capable of loving. So I don't buy into that saying either. You've got to love yourself before you can love anyone else.
I actually have that in my fantasy book. You
Yeah.
know, we were talking before we were talking before we started recording about my fantasy book and how I've thrown coaching stuff in there, and that is one of the things I put in there because people I'm an advocate on both sides, right? I'm an advocate the more that you love yourself, the more you can love other people. Like your well increases, right? So it's not a matter of if you're capable or not, but the tethering is strengthened because there's more facets to look at. And so anyway, I put that in my book though, just because so many people are like, well, how can I love another person? Like I hate myself. But yet you can sit there and love this, you know, animal on your lap, like, and feed it and nurture its little broken arm and, you know, do all of these things. That is an act of love.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. So I don't know where that saying come from, to be honest. But no, I don't believe that to be true either. And it's the same as over. I'm not sure if you had this in it, but this whole thing with Ukraine that's going on. there was an aeroplane that came to the UK with a lot of Ukrainian children looking. They were shouting out for people who, if you've got a spare bedroom, if you'd have one of these refugees. And everybody was like, within minutes, that they had homes for all these children. If that plane had have come from Africa or Jamaica and they all had brown or black faces, you wouldn't have got the same response in this country, because unfortunately you're not gonna, I don't believe we're gonna get rid of racism in your or my lifetime. People say it's got better, and it has in some parts, but it's also got a lot worse because now we've got the internet and social media and so on. So the area that I was brought up, where I had, because of how I looked, and the whole family had a lot of racism, it's still the same, and the council know that that area in Wolverhampton is still very much racist. And you've only got to watch some sports matches and you can hear the racism on the terraces. And, you know, I think we've got as human beings, we've got a long way to go. You know,
Yeah,
we would.
I
Sorry.
actually, one of the things I was really curious about, because in the United States, there's definitely like Black Lives Matter, right? There's this whole movement right now, but there's racism not only just on black skin, but on everything, like Korean and Japanese. I mean, essentially, if you're anything other than a white male, there's racism of some sort, culturalism around something.
Yeah.
And
Even COVID, there was racism when COVID started, because it was said that it came from a Chinese factory or something.
I
And
have
over
heard that.
here, yeah, and over here we had some Chinese and Cantonese takeaways. Their shops were broken into and smashed windows, and we have racism towards Irish people, all different races, and it's awful.
I so for a long time I worked with women with weight loss, and even working with women for years, I did not understand until several years into it that there's there's discrimination against fat people. Like there's just discrimination on like so many things. I know as having a special needs kid, I am often things are often targeted towards us because we have a special needs kid, right? Like
Yeah.
we're taking up space. My kid is screaming. How dare
Not
you let your
invited to
kid scream?
parties. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Then like there's little things too. Like people don't understand that my kid has to follow a very strict schedule. I can't be with you. Like I
Yeah.
have to be home with my kid, right? There's just so many things. And nobody, like again, we all have similarities, but nobody is the same. We are all so unique. I just sometimes I don't understand. Like I feel part of me feels like maybe I'm always going to have a different perspective because I grew up essentially by myself because I didn't have people to talk to. I mean, like when you're talking, like, I'm like, it wouldn't even, I wouldn't even think to ask if somebody was adopted or not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't even matter because, I'm like, who are
Yeah,
you?
it
Like,
shouldn't matter. And sometimes people say it wouldn't matter to me, but you it unconsciously does, which you're not aware of. A lot of people have this unconscious bias as they talk about it. Like there's an influencer in America, and this is about racism, and she spoke very openly about this, and I mentioned this in the first book, I think. And she was in, I think it's Chicago, and she was driving down the road in Chicago in a whoosh. And she saw this car trying to pull out this parking space that she was waiting for, and had blacked out windows, music blaring. And she's like, oh God, typical black guy, can't drive, can't get in and out the parking space. She was getting up, she was swearing and shouting at him to hurry up. She was, I was getting so frustrated. She says, and then he wound the window down, and it was this elderly white guy. And she says, I immediately changed. Has everything changed in me? And I was like, oh, shall I get out and help him? Oh, look, he's really struggling. She says, and I caught myself. I didn't realise I had that in me. A lot of people don't realise that they have minute racism trapped in them. And she went home and told her dad, and her dad said, well, most of them can't drive anyway, can they? And she says, and immediately I knew that's where I must have got it from growing up. She wasn't aware of it. And a lot of people have said, especially with the Black Lives Matter thing after George Floyd a few years ago, and in all the football matches, everybody was taking the knee, and everybody was like, yeah, Black, we'll support you, we'll stand by you. And then a few months in on social media, it was mind blowing. people are going, oh, are we still taking the knee? Are we still going on about it? You can't be a part-time non-racist, Ashley. You know, people are quick to jump on the bandwagon and yeah, we support you, but they don't really understand what they're doing or what they're saying, and they don't really support you, you know. And it's frustrating. Every day I will open up socials and I will see some hateful or racist or misogynistic or, you know, in people's families, and it's just heartbreaking. And we're learning so much these days, and we're more informed than ever before, but we're not taking any notice. We're not really understanding for the most part. I think a lot of things are worse than they've ever been because we've got the internet. And when somebody was calling me names, I knew who it was because they'd be saying it to my face or in the street or whatever it is. But now, if somebody comes on my social media, I
Mhm.
don't know who they are. They've never met me. I don't. They're the other side of the world, maybe. And
Yeah, they can have a fake profile too.
you can get the people that get trolled and abused
Mhm.
is tenfold than what it used to be now because they've got the access to you. And I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think racism and everything else is any better than what it used to be. I think it's worse, in fact.
I mean, I know for us with my teenager with social media, when he was going through all of his stuff, which again, that's not agreeable and conformity. So anytime you're not being conformatizing to what the main media wants, you're going to face this kind of stuff. He would get anonymous text. Like you didn't even have to create a fake profile or a fake picture. It's just anonymous with hateful things,
And how do
horrible
you
things.
police that? How do you play? Because you can not let them have a phone. You can put settings on their laptops or computer, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
But they will get shown things at school on
Yeah.
somebody else's phone, and people have always got access to you, no matter what scenarios you put yourself in. And it's awful. But like you say, if you've got children who are on the spectrum, they're different to what people like to see. You know, it makes them feel uncomfortable. They don't know how to deal with it. And, you know, if somebody's got some kind of disfigurement or what, it's just horrendous out there. And I completely understand why people don't leave the house anymore. And children today are becoming less, there's more ways of communicating than ever, and yet people are communicating less because they're scared to. People are scared to say the wrong thing. People are scared to offend. People are scared to ask you questions about. I mean, would you prefer if somebody said to you, if you was out with your children when they were younger and a child was staring because they were making a noise or whatever, would you have preferred somebody to come and ask you, you know, is he okay, or would you prefer to explain to somebody, or would you prefer them to just look the other way?
Well, I think when my kids were really little, again, I still had a lot of issues that I was carrying forward. So I had this whole thing, if somebody was staring at me, this is again before I've done my inner work, I had this whole thing of I must be doing something wrong as a mother. I must not be doing a good enough job. I'm not doing a good enough job keeping my kid quiet. My kid spilled things all over the floor. This is like my fault, like the guilt and the shame and all of that. And honestly, who knows what they were thinking? This was all just going up in my head
Yeah,
based on past experiences that I just assimilated and generalized as everybody is this way towards me. And so back then, I think that I would have preferred them not to do anything because I was already in such a state of shame and like, oh my gosh, we're different, like that's where I was coming from. And so if you came and like made it even more apparent, I mean, I would have probably just gotten smaller.
yeah,
But I'm a different person now. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. I guess I am such a person now where I'm like, whatever you thinking, that's on you. I'm just going to control my thoughts. Like, I'm not going to,
yeah,
whether they say something to me or not, I don't have a preference because
yeah,
I'm just in my lane and I'm focusing on me and I'm trying to live my best life and I'm trying to love myself through every moment. And that takes work. That takes
yeah,
work, people. I have to try. The other day, I wrote an email and I grew up that it was wrong to say anything like necessarily positive about yourself, because that would be boasting, and that's wrong. Like, you have no humility if you are to point something out positive that you have done. And even when somebody points it out positively about you, you're supposed to be like, no, like almost like in movies when you see people that are like, this old dress, like you're always supposed to be like, no, like I can't, like whatever. I grew up with this, which is one of the reasons why I was so quiet and so shy, right? I've done so much work, and even an email the other day where I was like saying something that has been great in my company that has happened to me. I was in so much discomfort and pain afterwards. I wished I could retract that email. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, but like I said, I realized what I was doing. I realized what was happening. And I could just be like, you know what? I'm choosing to love myself. If somebody wants to call me selfish for boasting, that's their judgment. That's what they're thinking. I am not responsible for that. I am responsible for loving myself and saying that if I was boasting, that I'm willing to forgive myself and not judge myself. And I'm going to love myself right now. So I literally day by day still have to do this work.
See, I needed to have had that when I was younger, a lot, because people would ask me before they knew anything else about me. They wanted to know where I was from, because I had brown skin. So I used to have my own business and so on, and I'd go to events and people would come and introduce themselves, and I'd introduce the first thing they would ask me before asking my name or anything about the business, the first thing I'd say is, where are you from? What do you mean? And sometimes it depended on my mood, I'd be like, I'm from England. No, but where are you from? Because obviously they could see brown skin. People had to know. I'm from the West Midlands. No, but where you really from? And they'd go on and on, but where you, and I'd just carry it on. I'm not answering them, because I thought if they knew that part of me wasn't English, I'd be judged by, I was dirty, or I was this, I was that, and everything that they was being told to think. And I had huge problems with it, and I ended up having therapy back then. But the therapists that I had were brown as well, and I couldn't talk to them because I didn't want to insult them with how I was feeling and being made to feel. But yeah, people just have this, and I should have had that knowledge then. I should have known how to, or been taught how to love myself back then, and what I was thinking that they were thinking. Because some people said to me, I did go on a course once, and somebody said to me, because I used to not introduce myself to people because I knew what they would ask. And sometimes they said they might just be looking for an icebreaker. They might be saying that to you for something to say to start a conversation, not because they're judging you. And I never saw it that way. I always thought that they were judging me because of how I looked. But they might have just been saying, like I could say to you, yes, you're American, but I could say to you, oh, whereabouts you from? But
Well, actually, both of my grandparents are Mayan Indian. But here's the thing, right? And this is why I stay really, really quiet about this, because I haven't been affected or shamed or anything along this lines with this stuff. People just assume that I'm like them. And at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but my grandmas are like, have all these like feathers, and they do holistic medicines that you've never even heard of, like, but I'm like what you're going through. I have never gone through. I had my own things I went through, but I have never gone through your examples. But had that been different?
Yeah, but you, with your background, your heritage that you've just said, no, like you said, nobody would know that, but you wouldn't have had the same experience as, say, I would have done, because your skin is white, so you look white.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, like, my cousin totally doesn't. So
is his skin darker than yours?
very.
So he would have had different experiences to what, and you've got the same heritage. But unfortunately, people are very visual, aren't they? They judge on what they see. As much as they say, oh no, I don't see colour, well, that in itself is racist, because of course you see colour, unless you're blind, you're not, of course you're going to see the colour, but it's how you respond and react to that. And we are, people are very visual. Their first judgment is on how people look, whether they're fat, thin, dark hair, blonde, brown, white, black, whatever it may be. And that's just who we are, but it's how you do that judgment.
It's what you make it mean and what you were taught to make it mean.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people have still got a long, long way to go with that.
Yeah. So let me ask you now, as an adult, just since we're starting to wrap up, it seems like you've really owned where you are, who you are. How does that affect you now? Like, do you think things, like for instance, for me, the way that I would teach somebody with the subconscious programming is that when you own, like, let's say that it's not an adoptee situation, but there's in times when like people are coming out of the closet with their sexual orientation, right? And so when you own that, because you've owned it and because you're comfortable with it, those type of situations, not that 100% go away, but lots of things fall away and they don't have the same issues that they were having before. I've seen this time and time again. Do you like register with that at all? Or
I have, for the first time ever in this past year, I have told a handful of people my heritage, my true heritage, which I've never done before. And as soon as I've said it, I've stunned myself, because I'm like, that's actually came for years. Even when I went into therapy, the words wouldn't come out of my mouth. So when people have asked me recently, I've said my father's Asian, my mother's English. Not everybody, because it's a long process. I've had 53 years of denying it, more or less. I've still not had a curry. I'm making forward steps with a lot of things in accepting. I think I'm accepting my heritage more than I ever have, but I've still got a long way to go. I think with how positive the response I had from the first book, which is when I came out about my heritage, I've had nothing but positivity from. So that's given me a confidence to, okay. And because the world has changed now, like there's not a chance I could have had this conversation or wrote that book 20, 30 years, not a chance. Whereas now the world feels a little bit more safer, because if you go into the city now, you see mixed race families everywhere. You would not have seen that 30 years ago. So now I feel a bit more comfortable. And I feel like, for want of a better way of saying it, I feel it's a bit more palatable for me to say, yes, I'm of mixed heritage. With regards to being adopted, I'm not ashamed of being adopted. My plight is to help other people see that being adopted isn't a disability as such, isn't a cross to bear. So I'm okay with that side of it. With my insecurities about being adopted and the challenges that I face on a daily basis, I recognise them now, whereas I didn't used to before. So I'm piecing together the puzzle as to why I have thought processes or actions or think certain ways about things, and where it stems from. So from the back of that and the responses that I've had from organisations and other people, that's where I've started this foundation now, to be that support for other adoptees and adopters. And just before I came on, I had an email from the local council, the local adoption agency, for me to go and give talks for potential adopters, to tell them, yes, you think you're being great by saying, oh, we just want to love all of these children. I'm going to say, well, actually, like we've said, you need more than love. You need to have this understanding that even if you just sat telling this adopted child, I love you, it's more, you need to do more than that. You need to have a genuine integrity in what you're doing and what you're saying, and not just as a baby, but for the rest of their life too. I was 51 when my mum said to me, you're not exactly family. And I'm a grown adult, and my mom still said that to me. So it's a lifelong journey. And that's the point of the foundation, and to help connect people with their biological families and understand their roots and where they come from, and to help them manage the fact that it's not all sunshine and roses, going on the journey to search for your roots, if you like, and your foundations. And I don't know if you've lost anybody really close. By the sound of it, I don't think you've lost your parents, but when you do lose your parents, you immediately feel like an orphan, and you feel like you haven't got that foundation. But that's how it feels like all of the time as an adoptee. And I want to try and help people deal with that and be that support for them.
Yeah, and so your second book is called Love, Susan, An Adopted Reality. And this is releasing in September, the end of September?
Yeah, I'm doing a huge book launch at and I love this part. I do it at the big main central library in the city, which is the same library that I went to when I was 21 years old to search for my biological family. So it's like done a full circle for me. So I went there to search for my family, and I'm now there having written a book about that search. So it will be launched there. The mayor of the city is going to come. A lot of the MP, the councillors will be coming, other authors and so on, the local press, and it's a wonderful day. I did the first book launch there, and it was just brilliant. So I'm hoping, touch wood, the cover of the book is what my file looks like. It's an adoptee file, a picture of me as a baby on there, and I'm hoping it will give some support or some reality into how it feels to be an adoptee. So I'm hoping people who are adoptees and adopters will read it and just to give them a bit more of a perspective as to what they're going into.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing your story, and also, for being willing to openly share it in a book that exists for time after time.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. I truly appreciate it. And yeah, that's the point of the book. So it's almost like a reference for people that will be there hopefully for a long time to come.
Exactly. I will make sure that her information is the show notes, so that if you're doing like pre-orders or something along that lines, that the audience will have access to it. And I'm sure that Susan has some type of, connection if you wanted to reach out and ask questions. Obviously read her book, because there's going to be information and insight for you to consider in this. So it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And anything I can do for you with regards to, the show, I think just give me a shout.
Thank you. All right, everybody, you matter. Until next week.